The summer sun blazed mercilessly over Riverside Park in Pine Ridge, Texas, as the annual Johnson family reunion reached its peak. Colorful picnic blankets dotted the sprawling green space, while the tantalizing aroma of barbecued ribs and sweet cornbread filled the air. Children's laughter echoed across the playground as dozens of relatives celebrated another year of family bonds, completely unaware that their joyful gathering was about to transform into every parent's worst nightmare. 3-year-old Lily Martinez bounced excitedly on the bright red swing set, her tiny hands gripping the chains as her cousin Miguel pushed her higher and higher. Her dark curls danced in the breeze, and her infectious giggle drew smiles from nearby adults who paused their conversations to watch the carefree toddler. Lily's mother, Carmen, sat just 30 feet away at a picnic table, engaged and animated. Conversation with her sister Rosa about work schedules and weekend plans. The peaceful scene felt perfectly safe surrounded by family, in broad daylight, with dozens of watchful eyes nearby. "Higher, Miguel! Higher!" Lily squealed with delight, her small legs pumping back and forth as she soared through the air. Her bright yellow sundress fluttered like butterfly wings, and her tiny sandals caught glints of sunlight with each swing. Carmen glanced over every few minutes, smiling at her daughter's pure joy. After the devastating loss of Lily's father 8 months earlier, these moments of unbridled happiness had become precious and rare. At exactly 3:47 p.m., according to multiple witnesses, Miguel was called away by his grandmother to help carry ice from the parking lot. He gently slowed Lily's swing and told her to stay put until he returned. "Don't go anywhere, Prima," he said, using his pet name for his little cousin. Lily nodded solemnly, understanding the importance of staying safe, just as her father had always taught her. But when Miguel returned just 4 minutes later, carrying a heavy bag of ice, the swing moved empty in the summer breeze. "Lily?" he called, scanning the immediate area. "Lily, where are you?" The first wave of concern rippled through the family, when Miguel's voice carried across the park with increasing urgency. Carmen's head snapped up from her conversation, her maternal instincts immediately sensing danger. She rushed to the playground, her heart beginning to race as she called her daughter's name. "Lily! Mia! Where are you?" Carmen's voice grew louder, more desperate with each unanswered call. Other family members began abandoning their activities. Uncle Roberto dropped his guitar mid-song. Aunt Maria left her famous tres leches cake half-frosted, and teenagers emerged from their scattered conversations to join the search. Within minutes, the festive atmosphere transformed into controlled chaos. Family members spread out across the 15-acre park like a human search net, calling Lily's name in both English and Spanish. They checked behind every tree, under every picnic table, and inside the public restrooms twice. The elderly relatives stayed near the pavilion, forming a command center where Carmen's sister Rosa began frantically calling 911. "My niece is missing from Riverside Park." Rosa spoke rapidly into her phone, her hands shaking as she provided details to the emergency dispatcher. "She's 3 years old, wearing a yellow dress, dark curly hair. She was just here 5 minutes ago." Carmen's composure began to crumble as each passing minute brought no sign of her daughter. She ran from relative to relative, her voice becoming hoarse from screaming Lily's name. Panic set in as she realized that the park bordered the notorious piney woods, thousands of acres of dense Texas wilderness known for its dangerous wildlife and treacherous terrain. She wouldn't just wander off, Carmen told anyone who would listen, tears streaming down her face. Miguel taught her to stay close to family. "She's a good girl. She follows rules. Someone must have taken her." The possibility of abduction sent a chill through the assembled relatives. Uncle Roberto immediately began questioning other park visitors, while Aunt Elena started checking the parking lot for suspicious vehicles. The younger cousins were tasked with searching every playground structure again, calling Lily's name into every tunnel and hiding spot. As word spread, neighbors and strangers began joining the search effort. Dog walkers, joggers, and other park visitors abandoned their activities to help look for the missing toddler. The park quickly filled with voices calling Lily in every direction, creating an echo that seemed to bounce endlessly off the surrounding trees. At 4:15 p.m., exactly 28 minutes after Lily's disappearance, the wail of sirens cut through the desperate shouts. Pine Ridge police officer Jake Morrison arrived in his patrol car, followed immediately by a specialized K-9 unit vehicle. From the passenger seat emerged Duke, a massive 85-pound bloodhound whose reputation preceded him throughout East Texas. Duke was a legend in law enforcement, circles a 6-year-old bloodhound who had successfully located 47 missing persons. During his distinguished career, his incredible nose could follow scent trails up to 3 days old, and his success rate was virtually unmatched. Local newspapers had featured Duke's heroic rescues multiple times, and parents throughout the region knew his name as a symbol of hope when children went missing. Officer Morrison, a 10-year veteran of the Pine Ridge Police Department, had partnered with Duke for just 8 months. The pairing had been challenging. Duke had transferred from military service and seemed to struggle with bonding to new handlers. Despite their professional success rate, Morrison always felt that Duke held part of himself back, as if mourning something from his past. As Morrison attached Duke's working harness and grabbed his tracking equipment, Carmen rushed over with Lily's favorite teddy bear, a worn brown bear named Osito that still carried her daughter's distinctive scent. Her hands trembled as she held it out to the officer. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please find my baby girl." Dark storm clouds had begun gathering on the horizon, and everyone knew that rain would wash away scent trails and make the search exponentially more difficult. The clock was ticking, and the stakes had never been higher. Morrison looked into Carmen's desperate eyes and made a promise he prayed he could keep. "Duke and I will bring her home." Duke's massive head lowered to the worn teddy bear, his powerful nostrils flaring as he processed the complex scent signature that would guide their search. Officer Morrison watched with professional interest as the bloodhound worked. Duke's entire body language had shifted the moment he caught Lily's scent. The dog's tail, which had been hanging low in his typical reserved manner, suddenly lifted with purpose. His ears perked forward, and for the first time since their partnership began, Morrison saw something different in Duke's dark eyes, an intensity that bordered on urgency. "Got it, boy?" Morrison asked, though he already knew the answer. Duke's reaction was unlike anything he'd witnessed in their 8 months together. A bloodhound usually took several minutes to fully lock onto a trail, but this time he'd captured the scent almost instantly, as if something about it was familiar. Duke began moving immediately, pulling Morrison away from the playground toward the eastern edge of Riverside Park. A massive dog's powerful shoulders strained against his harness as he followed an invisible trail that only his extraordinary nose could detect. Behind them, Carmen's voice grew fainter as she continued calling Lily's name, refusing to leave the immediate area despite other family members' attempts to comfort her. "We're heading toward the piney woods," Morrison radioed to dispatch, his voice tight with concern. The piney woods of East Texas stretched for thousands of acres, a dense wilderness that had claimed the lives of experienced hunters and hikers. Over the years, for a 3-year-old child, it represented dangers that Morrison didn't want to contemplate: rattlesnakes, wild boars, steep ravines, and the very real possibility of getting hopelessly lost in terrain so thick that search helicopters couldn't see through the canopy. As they crossed the tree line, the temperature dropped noticeably. A thick canopy of towering pine trees blocked out most of the late afternoon sun, creating an almost twilight atmosphere, even though it was barely past 4:30 p.m. Ancient pines stretched upward like cathedral pillars, their trunks so massive that it would take 3 adults holding hands to encircle them. Between these giants grew impenetrable understory of yelping holly, wild grapevines, and thorny dewberry bushes that seemed designed to snag clothing and skin. Duke pressed forward with unwavering determination, his nose sweeping back and forth as he followed the scent trail deeper into the wilderness. Morrison struggled to keep up, pushing through barriers of thorny vines that left scratches along his arms and uniform. His radio crackled with updates from other officers who had arrived to coordinate the search, but he could barely hear them over the sound of his own labored breathing and the constant rustle of vegetation. "This is Morrison," he panted into his radio during a brief pause. "Duke's tracking strong, but we're getting into some rough terrain. The trail is leading us northeast, approximately half a mile into the woods now." The scent trail meandered through the forest in a way that puzzled Morrison. Rather than the random wandering he'd expect from a lost toddler, Duke seemed to be following a surprisingly direct path. Lily had somehow navigated through terrain that would challenge an adult, avoiding the worst of the thorny underbrush and steering clear of the marshy areas where cottonmouth snakes liked to sun themselves on fallen logs. 20 minutes into their trek, Duke suddenly stopped at the edge of a small creek. The bloodhound whined softly, circling back and forth along the muddy bank. Morrison's heart sank. Water was every tracking dog's nemesis. If Lily had crossed the creek, her scent would be dramatically diluted, making Duke's job exponentially more difficult. "Come on, boy," Morrison encouraged, watching as Duke worked the problem. "Where did she go?" But after several tense minutes, Duke picked up the trail again on the same side of the creek. The scent led away from the water, following what appeared to be an old deer trail that wound deeper into the forest. Morrison marveled at the 3-year-old's apparent ability to navigate such challenging terrain, though his admiration was tinged with growing worry about what they might find at the trail's end. The storm clouds that had been gathering on the horizon were now directly overhead, casting ominous shadows through the forest canopy. Morrison could feel the atmospheric pressure dropping, and the first rumble of distant thunder echoed through the trees. Rain would be devastating to their search efforts. Not only would it wash away Lily's scent trail, but it would also create flash flooding in the low-lying areas of the forest. As they pushed deeper into the wilderness, Morrison began to notice something unusual about Duke's behavior. The bloodhound wasn't just following a scent trail, he seemed almost excited, his tail wagging intermittently despite the serious nature of their mission. In all their previous searches, Duke had maintained a professional, almost mechanical focus. This felt different, more personal somehow. "Talk to me, Duke," Morrison said quietly as they navigated around a massive fallen pine tree. "What's got you so worked up?" The forest around them was eerily quiet, except for the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush and the distant caw of a red-tailed hawk circling high above the canopy. Morrison checked his GPS unit and realized they were now more than a mile from the park, in an area where cell phone coverage was spotty at best. If something went wrong out here, help would be a long time coming. Duke suddenly picked up his pace, pulling Morrison forward with renewed urgency. The bloodhound's breathing was becoming more labored in the humid air, but his determination never wavered. They climbed over fallen logs, pushed through curtains of Spanish moss, and navigated around patches of poisonous coral bean plants that glowed bright red in the filtered sunlight. After nearly an hour of relentless tracking, Duke's behavior changed again. His head came up from the ground, and he began testing the air with quick, shallow breaths. Morrison recognized the shift. They were close. Duke had detected fresh scent, meaning Lily was somewhere nearby. The bloodhound's pace quickened to an almost frantic level, weaving between trees with surprising agility for such a large animal. Morrison's heart hammered in his chest as they approached what appeared to be a small clearing ahead. Through the trees, he could see dappled sunlight filtering down to the forest floor. Duke suddenly froze, every muscle in his powerful body tensing as he stared into the clearing ahead. His ears were pricked forward, and a low, almost questioning whine escaped his throat. It wasn't the sound of a dog who had found something tragic. It was something else entirely. Something Morrison had never heard from his partner before. As they stepped into the clearing, Morrison prepared himself for whatever they might discover, knowing that the next few moments would determine whether their desperate search would end in triumph or tragedy. Officer Morrison's breath caught in his throat as he stepped into the sun-dappled clearing, his hand instinctively moving to his radio to call for backup. Every possible scenario had run through his mind during their hour-long trek through the wilderness, finding Lily injured, lost, and terrified, or worse. What he discovered instead defied all logic and left him questioning his own eyes. There, sitting cross-legged on a moss-covered fallen log in the center of the clearing, was 3-year-old Lily Martinez. She appeared completely unharmed, her yellow sundress somehow still bright and relatively clean despite her journey through the thorny underbrush. Her dark curls caught the filtered sunlight streaming through the pine canopy, and her small face wore an expression of calm concentration that seemed impossible for a child who should have been terrified and crying for her mother. But what truly stunned Morrison wasn't just finding Lily safe, it was what she was doing. The toddler was engaged in what appeared to be an intense, one-sided conversation with the empty air in front of her. Her tiny hands moved with deliberate precision, forming gestures that seemed far too sophisticated for someone her age. As Morrison watched in bewilderment, Lily pointed to her own eyes with 2 fingers, and swept her arm in a wide arc around the clearing, and finally placed her palm flat against her chest. Duke's reaction was even more extraordinary. The massive bloodhound, who typically maintained professional composure during searches, was practically vibrating with excitement. His tail wagged so furiously that his entire rear end swayed back and forth, and he whined softly, not the distressed whine of a working dog encountering danger, at the joyful sound of recognition and pure happiness. "Lily?" Morrison called out gently, not wanting to startle the child. "Honey, your mommy is looking for you. Everyone's very worried." The little girl looked up at him with bright, intelligent eyes that showed no trace of fear or confusion. Instead, she smiled a radiant expression that seemed to light up the entire clearing. "Hi, policeman," she said cheerfully, as if being found alone in the middle of a dangerous forest was the most natural thing in the world. "I've been waiting for the doggy friend to come find me. He told me he would." Morrison glanced around the clearing, searching for any sign of another person or animal. They were completely alone except for the occasional bird call and the rustle of wind through the pine needles above. "Who told you that, sweetheart? There's no one else here." Lily giggled, a sound so innocent and carefree that it seemed to belong in a playground rather than deep in the Texas wilderness. "The doggy friend," she repeated, pointing directly at Duke. "He's been talking to me the whole time. He said his name is Duke, and that he's a very good boy." A chill ran down Morrison's spine. He had never mentioned Duke's name, and they were still 50 feet away from the child. There was no way she could have heard him use the dog's name during their search, yet she had identified him perfectly. "Lily," Morrison said carefully, his training in dealing with traumatized children taking over, "have you been sitting here this whole time? How did you get so far into the woods?" "I followed the path," she said simply, then turned back toward Duke with renewed excitement. The bloodhound had moved closer, his professional demeanor completely abandoned as he gazed at the child with what could only be described as adoration. What happened next made Morrison question everything he thought he knew about the world. Lily raised her right hand and made a quick, sharp downward motion with her palm. Duke immediately dropped to his belly, his powerful body lowering to the ground in perfect formation. Morrison's jaw dropped. That was a military-style down command, executed with precision that most police dogs took months to master. "Good boy, Duke." Lily clapped her hands twice, and the bloodhound's tail thumped against the forest floor with unbridled joy. Morrison fumbled for his radio, his hands shaking as he tried to process what he was witnessing. "Dispatch, this is Morrison. I found the missing child. She's unharmed and we're about a mile northeast of the park. Coordinates, He rattled off their GPS location while staring in disbelief at the impossible scene unfolding before him. Lily wasn't finished with her demonstration. She held up one finger, then made a circular motion with her index finger. Duke immediately rose to his feet and spun in a complete circle, his massive body moving with surprising grace. The child laughed with delight and clapped her hands. "Where did you learn to do that, honey?" Morrison asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Daddy taught me," Lily said matter-of-factly, then made another gesture pointing to her eyes, then to Duke, then patting the ground beside her. The bloodhound immediately moved to sit at her left side, positioning himself exactly as he would during a formal canine demonstration. Morrison's radio crackled to life with dispatch confirming backup was en route, but he barely heard it. He was transfixed by the sight of a 3-year-old child communicating flawlessly with his highly trained police dog using what appeared to be advanced hand signals that Duke recognized and obeyed without hesitation. The most unsettling part was Duke's behavior. The bloodhound, who had always been somewhat aloof and professional with Morrison, was displaying an emotional connection to this child that went far beyond anything he'd ever shown his current handler. Duke's entire body language had changed. His ears were forward, his eyes bright and alert, and he seemed to hang on Lily's every movement as if she were speaking a language he understood perfectly. "How long have you known Duke, sweetheart?" Morrison asked, though he already knew the answer would defy logic. "Forever and ever," Lily said with the absolute certainty that only a 3-year-old could possess. "Daddy said Duke is the goodest boy in the whole world, and that he would always keep me safe." Thunder rumbled overhead, closer now than before, and the first fat raindrops began to filter through the pine canopy. Morrison knew they needed to get Lily back to her frantic family, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had stumbled onto something extraordinary, something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about the bond between humans and animals. As he called out their location to the approaching backup team, Morrison watched Lily whisper something into Duke's ear. The massive bloodhound's tail wagged even harder, and he gently licked the little girl's face, eliciting another peal of joyful laughter. Whatever was happening here was far more than a simple search and rescue. Morrison had the distinct feeling that he was witnessing a reunion rather than a first meeting, but that was impossible, wasn't it? The sound of approaching voices and crackling radios echoed through the forest as backup units made their way toward the clearing. But Officer Morrison found himself frozen in place, unable to look away from the extraordinary scene unfolding before him. Lily Martinez continued her impossible conversation with Duke, and with each passing moment, the precision and complexity of her commands became more astounding. "Watch this, policeman," Lily announced with the enthusiasm of a child showing off her favorite toy. She raised both hands above her head, then brought them down in a sharp, synchronized motion while making a soft clicking sound with her tongue. Duke immediately flattened himself against the ground in what Morrison recognized as a tactical down, a specialized position used by military working dogs during combat situations where absolute stillness and silence were crucial for survival. Morrison's hands trembled as he reached for his notepad, desperately trying to document what he was witnessing. In his 10 years of law enforcement and 8 months partnering with Duke, he had never seen the bloodhound execute such advanced maneuvers. These weren't basic obedience commands that any dog owner might know. These were sophisticated military signals that required months of intensive training to master. "Lily, honey," Morrison said, his voice carefully controlled despite his racing heart, "where exactly did your daddy teach you these special hand signals?" The little girl's face lit up with pride and joy. "At the big place with all the doggies," she exclaimed, clapping her hands together. "Daddy took me there lots and lots of times. He said I was his special helper, and that all the good doggies needed to know of a friend." Before Morrison could respond, Lily demonstrated another command that made his blood run cold. She placed her index finger to her lips in the universal quiet gesture, then pointed toward a dense thicket of trees at the edge of the clearing. Duke immediately shifted into what Morrison recognized as silent alert position, ears forward, body tensed, every muscle coiled and ready to respond to threats while maintaining absolute silence. This wasn't just advanced training, this was counterterrorism protocol. Morrison had seen similar techniques during joint training exercises with military units, but he had never witnessed a civilian, let alone a 3-year-old child, demonstrate such knowledge. "Sweet Jesus," Morrison whispered under his breath, then immediately composed himself as Lily turned her attention back to him. "Duke is the best doggy in the whole wide world," she announced with absolute conviction. "Daddy said Duke saved lots and lots of people, and that he was the bravest doggy ever. He said Duke has a purple heart, just like him." Morrison's mind reeled. The Purple Heart was a military decoration awarded to service members wounded in combat. If Lily's father had been awarded one, and if he had somehow known Duke well enough to discuss the dog's service record with his daughter, then there was a connection here that went far deeper than coincidence. The sound of breaking branches announced the arrival of the backup team, but Morrison held up his hand to signal them to stay back. Sergeant Williams from the Pine Ridge Fire Department emerged from the tree line first, followed by 2 EMTs carrying medical equipment. "Is she injured?" Sergeant Williams called out, but his voice died away as he witnessed what Morrison was seeing. Lily had moved on to even more complex demonstrations. She made a series of rapid hand gestures touching her chest, pointing to Duke, and making a sweeping motion that encompassed the entire clearing. Duke responded by moving into what Morrison could only describe as a protective perimeter stance, positioning himself between Lily and the approaching rescuers while maintaining a calm, non-aggressive posture. "It's okay, Duke," Lily said softly, reaching out to stroke the massive dog's head. "These are good people. Daddy said policemans and firemans are always good people who help keep everyone safe." At the sound of her voice, Duke immediately relaxed, his tail resuming its happy wagging as he looked back and forth between Lily and the approaching rescue team. "Morrison," Sergeant Williams whispered as he approached, "what in the hell is going on here? How does that kid know advanced K9 commands?" "I have no idea," Morrison replied honestly, though his mind was working frantically to piece together the puzzle. "But look at this." He gestured for Williams to watch as Lily performed what appeared to be a final demonstration. She stood up from the fallen log, brushed off her yellow sundress with the careful precision of a much older child, and then executed a series of hand signals that told Duke to perform a complete security sweep of the immediate area. Duke obeyed flawlessly, moving in a systematic pattern around the clearing, checking behind trees and fallen logs, his nose working constantly to detect any potential threats. When he completed the circuit, he returned to Lily's side and sat at perfect attention, waiting for his next command. That's a level 4 security protocol. Williams breathed, his eyes wide with disbelief. I've only seen that at military installations. Who is this kid's father? Before Morrison could respond, his radio crackled to life with Carmen's frantic voice. Please tell me you found her. Please tell me my baby is okay. She's safe, Mrs. Rodriguez, Morrison responded, watching as Lily's face brightened at the sound of her mother's voice. We're bringing her out now, but I need to ask you some questions about Lily's father. It's important. There was a long pause before Carmen's voice came back, heavy with emotion. Miguel was Army Special Forces. He died in Afghanistan 8 months ago. Why? What does that have to do with anything? Morrison looked at Duke, who was gazing at Lily with an expression of pure devotion, and suddenly everything began to make sense. The bloodhound's unusual excitement upon catching Lily's scent, his immediate recognition of her advanced hand signals, and most importantly, the obvious emotional bond between them that transcended anything Morrison had ever witnessed. Mrs. Rodriguez, Morrison said carefully, I think your husband might have known Duke. I think they might have worked together. The silence on the radio stretched for several heartbeats before Carmen's voice returned, barely above a whisper. That's impossible. Miguel's dog died with him in the explosion. Duke couldn't be ... could he? As if understanding the conversation, Duke moved closer to Lily and gently nuzzled her small hand. The little girl looked up at Morrison with those bright, intelligent eyes and said something that sent chills down his spine. Daddy said Duke would always find me if I ever got lost. He said good dogs never forget their promises. Morrison realized that they had stumbled onto something far more profound than a simple search and rescue mission. They had discovered a living legacy, a bond that had survived tragedy and separation, connecting a fallen soldier's daughter to his faithful partner. Through love, training, and an unbreakable promise that transcended even death itself. The journey back through the piney woods felt like a procession of miracles. Lily rode on Officer Morrison's shoulders, chattering happily about her adventure while Duke walked alongside them with the protective devotion of a guardian angel. Every few steps, the massive bloodhound would pause to look up at the little girl, his tail wagging as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. The backup team followed in respectful silence, all of them sensing they had witnessed something extraordinary that would change their understanding of loyalty and love forever. When they emerged from the forest into the fading daylight of Riverside Park, Carmen Rodriguez broke through the crowd of family members and emergency responders like a woman possessed. She swept Lily into her arms, sobbing with relief as she covered her daughter's face with kisses, her hands frantically checking for any sign of injury. Mia, amor, where were you? Carmen cried, holding Lily so tightly that Morrison worried she might hurt the child. Mommy was so scared. Don't ever run away like that again. I didn't run away, Mommy, Lily protested, squirming in her mother's embrace to look back at Duke, who sat watching the reunion with patient intensity. I went to find Duke. Daddy said he would be waiting for me. Carmen's tear-streaked face went pale at the mention of her late husband. She looked from her daughter to the massive bloodhound, then to Officer Morrison, her eyes filled with confusion and desperate hope. What is she talking about? How does she know this dog? Morrison gently guided Carmen away from the crowd of relatives and curious onlookers who had gathered to witness Lily's safe return. Mrs. Rodriguez, I need to ask you some very specific questions about your husband's military service. What unit was he with in Afghanistan? The 75th Ranger Regiment, Carmen replied without hesitation, her voice still shaking from the emotional trauma of the last few hours. He was a staff sergeant, a dog handler with the Special Operations Command. But why does that matter? Miguel died 8 months ago in Kandahar province. His dog, a German shepherd named Bruno, died with him in the IED explosion. Morrison felt his heart skip a beat. Mrs. Rodriguez, are you absolutely certain about the dog's name? Could there have been any confusion in the military records? Carmen's brow furrowed as she tried to recall the painful details she had tried so hard to forget. The casualty notification officer said both Miguel and his partner were killed instantly. But ... double quotes. She paused, pressing her hand to her forehead, as if trying to retrieve a buried memory. Wait, there was something strange about the paperwork. The dog's service records were classified, and they wouldn't give me details about his previous assignments. Mommy, that's not Bruno, Lily interrupted, wiggling out of her mother's arms and running back to Duke. She threw her small arms around the bloodhound's massive neck, burying her face in his fur. This is Duke, Daddy's first doggy friend. He told me all about him. Carmen stared at her daughter in bewilderment. Lily, baby, what are you talking about? Daddy's dog was Bruno. You know that. Bruno was Daddy's last doggy, Lily explained with the patient tone of a child correcting an adult's misunderstanding. But Duke was his first doggy. They went on lots of adventures together before Bruno came. Daddy said Duke was the smartest doggy ever, but he got hurt and had to go to the doctor doggies for a long time. Morrison pulled out his cell phone with trembling fingers. Mrs. Rodriguez, I need to make some calls. If what Lily is saying is true, then this changes everything. He dialed the number for the military K-9 coordination office. A contact he had developed during Duke's transition to civilian police work. While Morrison spoke in hushed tones to military personnel, Carmen knelt beside her daughter and Duke, studying the bloodhound's face as if seeing him for the first time. There was something familiar about his dark eyes, something that tugged at memories she couldn't quite grasp. Lily, Carmen said softly, when did Daddy tell you about Duke? Every night when he tucked me in, Lily replied matter-of-factly. He said Duke was his bravest friend, and that someday I might meet him. He taught me the special hand words, so Duke would know I was Daddy's little girl. Morrison ended his call and walked back to them, his face grave with the weight of what he had just learned. Mrs. Rodriguez, I just spoke with Master Sergeant Collins at the Military Working Dog Program. Duke was indeed assigned to your husband for 18 months, from January 2022 to July 2023. They were deployed together twice before. Duke was injured in a roadside bombing that took place 3 months before your husband's death. Carmen gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. An injury that kept Miguel stateside for 2 months? He said his dog had been reassigned, but he never talked about it. He was so heartbroken when he came home that summer. According to the records, Duke suffered severe PTSD after the explosion, Morrison continued. He spent months in rehabilitation at Lackland Air Force Base. Miguel was given a new partner, Bruno, for his final deployment. Duke was eventually deemed fit for civilian law enforcement work and was transferred to our department 8 months ago. The timeline hit Carmen like a physical blow. 8 months ago, right after Miguel died. Morrison nodded solemnly. Duke's been struggling with depression and adjustment issues since his arrival. The veterinary behaviorist said he seemed to be mourning his previous handler. Now I understand why. As if he understood every word of the conversation, Duke moved closer to Carmen and gently placed his massive head in her lap. For the first time since Miguel's death, Carmen felt a connection to something her husband had loved, something that carried a piece of his spirit. Miguel used to talk about his dogs all the time, Carmen whispered, stroking Duke's fur with reverent hands. He said they weren't just partners, they were family. He said the bond between a handler and his dog was sacred, something that death couldn't break. Lily climbed onto Duke's back like he was a gentle pony, and the massive dog didn't move a muscle, accepting her weight with the patience of a saint. Daddy said Duke would always remember her family, she announced proudly. He said good dogs never forget the people they love. Morrison watched the reunion with tears in his eyes, finally understanding why Duke had been so excited when he caught Lily's scent. It wasn't just professional recognition. It was coming home to a family he thought he had lost forever. Mrs. Rodriguez, Morrison said quietly, I think Miguel kept his promise. He made sure Duke would find his way back to you when you needed him most. The evening air was thick with emotion as Officer Morrison made another crucial phone call, this time to Master Sergeant Rebecca Williams at the Military Working Dog Training School in San Antonio. The crowd of family members and emergency responders had begun to disperse, but Carmen, Lily, and Duke remained at the park's picnic area, forming an unlikely trio that seemed to belong together despite the impossibility of their reunion. Master Sergeant Williams, this is Officer Morrison from Pine Ridge Police. I have a very unusual situation involving one of your former military working dogs, Morrison began, watching as Lily fed Duke pieces of leftover barbecue, while Carmen stared at the bloodhound with a mixture of wonder and heartbreak. Let me guess, Williams replied, her voice carrying the weariness of someone who had dealt with countless emotional canine situations. You're calling about Duke, call sign Ranger 7. I've been expecting this call for months. Morrison's grip tightened. On his phone, you've been expecting it? Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez was one of our most gifted handlers, Williams explained, her voice softening with respect. He didn't just train dogs, he formed bonds with them that went beyond anything I've seen in 23 years of military service. When Duke was injured and Miguel had to deploy with a new partner, Miguel made me promise something that I thought was just the grief talking. What kind of promise? He made me swear that if anything happened to him, someone would make sure Duke found his way back to his family. He was obsessed with the idea that Duke would somehow end up near his wife and daughter. At the time, I thought it was just a grieving handler talking, but Miguel was insistent. He said he had prepared his daughter for the possibility. Carmen, who had been listening to Morrison's side of the conversation, suddenly stood up with tears streaming down her face. Can I talk to her? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Morrison handed her the phone, and Carmen's voice shook as she spoke. Master Sergeant Williams, this is Carmen Rodriguez, Martinez, Miguel's widow. Mrs. Martinez, Williams replied, and Carmen could hear the emotion in the soldier's voice. I am so deeply sorry for your loss. Your husband was one of the finest men I've ever had the honor of serving with. He talked about you and little Lily constantly. He never told me about Duke, Carmen said, watching as her daughter continued to share her food with the massive bloodhound. I knew about Bruno, his last partner, but not about Duke. That's because losing Duke nearly broke Miguel's spirit, Williams explained. When Duke was injured in that roadside bombing, Miguel blamed himself. He spent every free moment at the veterinary hospital, sleeping in a chair beside Duke's kennel during his recovery. The bond between them was extraordinary. I've never seen anything like it before or since. Carmen's heart ached as she imagined her husband's pain. What made their partnership so special? Miguel had a gift for understanding dogs on a level that went beyond training, Williams continued. He developed an advanced hand signal system that was so sophisticated we incorporated it into our standard training protocols. But more than that, he seemed to communicate with dogs on an emotional level. Duke wasn't just his partner, he was his battle brother. Across the picnic table, Lily looked up from feeding Duke and called out, Mommy, tell the army lady that Duke remembers all of Daddy's special signals. Williams paused on the other end of the line. Is that Lily? Miguel's little girl? Yes, Carmen replied, fresh tears flowing. She somehow knows hand signals that Duke recognizes. Advanced military commands that she shouldn't know. Oh my God, Williams breathed. Miguel actually did it. He really prepared her. What do you mean? Miguel brought Lily to the training facility 6 times during Duke's recovery period. Williams explained, her voice filled with amazement. He said he was teaching her to be a junior handler, in case she ever met Duke again. I thought it was just father-daughter bonding time, but now I realize he was systematically teaching her Duke's entire command structure. Carmen watched as Lily demonstrated another complex hand signal, causing Duke to move into a protective stance beside her. Chair, he never told me any of this. Miguel was very private about his grief over losing Duke, Williams said gently. But he made detailed notes about every command, every signal, every behavioral cue that Duke responded to. Those notes were in his personal effects. They should have been sent to you with his other belongings. Carmen's mind raced back to the boxes of Miguel's military equipment that she had been unable to bring herself to open. There were sealed containers from his unit that I couldn't face going through them. Mrs. Martinez, I think you need to look through those materials. Miguel left specific instructions about Duke in his final communications. He somehow arranged for Duke to be transferred to a department in your general area, though we could never figure out how he managed to pull those strings from a combat zone. The revelation hit Carmen like a thunderbolt. Miguel had orchestrated Duke's placement in Pine Ridge, somehow ensuring that their paths would eventually cross. He had trained Lily to recognize and communicate with Duke, preparing for a reunion that he must have known he might not live to see. There's something else, Williams continued. Miguel made a video recording specifically for Duke during the dog's rehabilitation. He said it was in case they were ever separated permanently. That recording is in his personal effects file. Morrison, who had been listening to Carmen's side of the conversation, gently took the phone back. Master Sergeant Williams, this is Officer Morrison again. How long had Duke been struggling with behavioral issues before today? Since the day he arrived at your department, Williams replied sadly. Duke has been mourning Miguel for 8 months. The veterinary behaviorist said he showed classic signs of complicated grief, loss of appetite, depression, difficulty bonding with new handlers. We were actually considering retirement for him. Morrison looked at Duke, who was now lying contentedly at Lily's feet while she used his back as a table for her coloring book. Well, I think we just found the cure for his depression. Officer Morrison, Williams said, her voice thick with emotion. What you're witnessing is the fulfillment of a promise that a dying soldier made to his daughter and his dog. Miguel Martinez believed in the power of love to transcend death. And somehow, he made it happen. As Morrison ended the call, he realized that they weren't just dealing with a coincidental reunion. They were witnessing the execution of a carefully planned operation that Miguel had orchestrated from a war zone, using his final months to ensure that the two beings he loved most, his daughter and his first canine partner, would find each other when they needed it most. The bond between Lily and Duke wasn't just special. It was Miguel's final gift to both of them. A bridge of love connecting the past to the future, ensuring that his legacy of loyalty and devotion would live on through their extraordinary friendship. 3 days after the miraculous reunion in the forest, Carmen Martinez sat on her living room floor, surrounded by unopened military containers, her hands trembling as she prepared to face the grief she had been avoiding for 8 months. Lily played quietly nearby with Duke, who had barely left the little girl's side since their discovery in the piney woods. Officer Morrison had arranged for Duke to stay with the family temporarily, citing the therapeutic benefit for both the child and the dog, though everyone involved knew this was far more than therapy. It was destiny fulfilling itself. The largest container bore Miguel's name and service number in neat military lettering. Carmen's heart hammered as she broke the seal, knowing that whatever lay inside would bring her husband's presence flooding back into their home. The first Items she discovered were familiar Miguel's dress uniform, his combat medals, and personal photographs from his deployments. But beneath these expected mementos lay something that took her breath away. A thick manila envelope marked for Duke. Emergency protocols. Inside the envelope, Carmen found dozens of pages in Miguel's precise handwriting, documenting every command, every behavioral cue, and every emotional response that Duke exhibited during their partnership. But more than mere training notes. These pages read like love letters to his four-legged battle brother, filled with observations about Duke's personality, his fears, his favorite treats, and the unique ways he showed affection. Duke exhibits separation anxiety when left alone for more than 3 hours, one entry read. He responds best to positive reinforcement combined with physical affection. His left ear is sensitive from shrapnel damage, always approach from his right side during stressful situations. He dreams actively and sometimes whimpers in his sleep. I believe he dreams about home. Carmen's tears fell onto the pages as she read Miguel's detailed observations, each one revealing the depth of love and understanding he had developed for his canine partner. But it was the final document in the envelope that shattered her heart. Completely. A video recording labeled "For Duke's Next Handler Personal Message." With shaking fingers, Carmen inserted the disc into her laptop. Miguel's face filled the screen, but this wasn't the confident soldier she remembered from their video calls during his deployment. This Miguel looked tired, battle-worn, and heartbroken. He was sitting in what appeared to be a military barracks, and she could see Duke sleeping peacefully in a kennel behind him. "If you're watching this video," Miguel began, his voice thick with emotion, "it means something has happened to me. And Duke needs a new handler. But before you start working with him, you need to understand that Duke isn't just a military working dog. He's my brother, my guardian angel, and the closest thing to family I have in this godforsaken place." Carmen pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob as she watched her husband pour his heart out to a stranger he would never meet. "Duke saved my life 17 times during our deployment," Miguel continued. "Not just from IEDs and enemy fire, but from despair, from loneliness, from the darkness that tries to consume every soldier's soul over here. When I held my daughter for the last time before this deployment, Duke seemed to understand that I was leaving something precious behind. He's been protecting that memory ever since." On the screen, Miguel turned to look at Duke's sleeping form, his expression filled with tenderness that Carmen had only seen him show to Lily. "I've taught my daughter, Lily, all of Duke's commands, just in case. I know it sounds crazy, but I have this feeling that someday she might need Duke, or he might need her." Carmen thinks I'm being overly sentimental, but a father's instincts are never wrong. Carmen gasped, realizing that Miguel had indeed foreseen this moment, somehow knowing that his death would bring Duke and Lily together. "Duke responds to love more than commands," Miguel continued. "He needs to feel valued, needed, part of a family. If something happens to me, please don't just treat him like equipment. He has emotions, memories, and a heart bigger than most humans I know. He deserves to be loved, not just utilized." The video continued with Miguel demonstrating the advanced hand signals that Lily had somehow remembered perfectly. Each command explained with the patience of a father teaching his child. As Carmen watched, she realized that Miguel hadn't just been preparing Duke for a new handler. He had been creating a bridge between his military family and his blood family, ensuring that his love would continue flowing between them even after his death. "There's one more thing," Miguel said as the video neared its end. "I've put in a request for Duke to be transferred to the Pine Ridge area after his recovery. I can't explain why, but I know in my gut that's where he belongs. Maybe it's just wishful thinking, but I believe Duke will find his way to Carmen and Lily when they need him most." The screen went black for a moment, then Miguel reappeared, this time holding a small object in his hands. "Duke, buddy, if you're watching this somehow, I need you to know that you're the best partner, the best friend, and the best brother a man could ask for. You kept me alive long enough to serve my country with honor, and now I need you to do one more mission for me. I need you to watch over my girls. Protect Lily the way you protected me. Love her the way I love her. Be the father I can't be." Miguel's voice broke completely as he continued. "Carmen, mi amor, if you're seeing this, it means my worst fears have come true. But it also means my greatest hope is being fulfilled. Duke isn't just a dog. He's a piece of my soul that I'm leaving with you and Lily. When you look into his eyes, you're looking at my love for both of you made manifest." As the video ended, Carmen looked across the room where Lily was curled up against Duke's massive frame, both of them sleeping peacefully on the carpet. Duke's front paw was draped protectively over the little girl, just as Miguel had described in his notes, a guardian watching over his most precious charge. Duke's eyes opened as if sensing Carmen's gaze, and for the first time since Miguel's death, Carmen felt her husband's presence in the room. Through Duke's intelligent brown eyes, she saw Miguel's love, Miguel's devotion, and Miguel's promise that death could not break the bonds that truly mattered. "I understand now, mi amor," Carmen whispered to her sleeping daughter and the dog, who had become their guardian angel. "You kept your promise. You brought our protector home." 6 months after the miraculous reunion in the piney woods, the Martinez household had transformed into something Miguel could never have imagined, but had somehow orchestrated from beyond. What began as a temporary arrangement had evolved into a permanent family structure that felt as natural as breathing. Duke had officially become Lily's emotional support animal, but in reality, he had become something far more profound, the living bridge between past and present, between grief and healing, between a father's love and a daughter's future. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows as Carmen prepared breakfast, watching through the glass doors as Lily and Duke conducted their daily training session in the backyard. At 4 years old, Lily had become the most accomplished child dog handler in Texas. Her skills so remarkable that the Pine Ridge Police Department had invited her to demonstrate proper canine interaction techniques at their community outreach events. "Good morning, Duke," Lily called out cheerfully, beginning their routine with the same precision Miguel had taught her during those precious visits to the military training facility. Duke immediately snapped to attention, his tail wagging with the pure joy that had become his constant state since finding his way back to Miguel's family. Carmen smiled as she watched her daughter guide Duke through increasingly complex exercises. The little girl had grown so much in the past 6 months, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically. The nightmares that had plagued her after Miguel's death had vanished completely. Her pediatric counselor, Dr. Sarah Chun, had documented the transformation as one of the most remarkable cases of therapeutic healing she had ever witnessed. The bond between Lily and Duke transcends traditional pet therapy, Dr. Chun had written in her final report. Through her connection with her father's former partner, Lily has been able to process her grief, maintain her connection to Miguel's memory, and develop confidence and leadership skills that will serve her throughout her life. Duke hasn't just become her companion, he's become her co-therapist, helping her navigate emotions too complex for her young mind to handle alone. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted Carmen's thoughts. Officer Morrison emerged from his patrol car, but this wasn't an official visit. Jake had become a regular part of their extended family, often stopping by to check on Duke's transition and to marvel at the continuing evolution of the bond between the child and the dog. "Morning, Carmen," Morrison called out, walking around to the backyard where Lily was demonstrating an advanced search pattern that Duke followed with military precision. "How's our miracle team doing today?" "See for yourself," Carmen replied, gesturing toward the yard where Lily had hidden several toys around the garden and was now directing Duke to find them using only hand signals. The massive bloodhound moved with purpose and joy, locating each hidden object and bringing it back to Lily's feet before sitting at perfect attention, awaiting his next command. Morrison shook his head in amazement, just as he had every time he witnessed their partnership in action. I've been a canine officer for 10 years, and I still can't believe what I'm seeing. She's better at reading Duke's behavior than most trained handlers. Miguel knew what he was doing, Carmen said softly, her voice filled with pride and lingering sadness. He prepared her for this in ways we're still discovering. The impact of Lily and Duke's story had rippled far beyond Pine Ridge. National news outlets had covered their reunion, leading to the creation of the Martinez Protocol, a new program that helped match retired military working dogs with the families of their deceased handlers. 12 successful placements had already been made across the country, with more families finding healing through the love that transcends even death. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a veterinary behaviorist at Texas A&M University, no relation, despite the shared surname, had been studying Duke's remarkable recovery for her research on canine grief and healing. Duke's transformation represents a breakthrough in our understanding of how dogs process loss and attachment, she explained during her presentation at the International Conference on Animal-Assisted Therapy. His depression and behavioral issues vanished completely once he was reunited with Lily, suggesting that the bond between military handlers and their dogs creates emotional imprints that can be inherited by family members. But beyond the scientific studies and media attention, the real magic happened in the quiet moments that only the Martinez family witnessed. It was Duke gently waking Lily from bad dreams by placing his massive head on her bed. It was the way. He positioned himself between her and strangers until she indicated they were safe. It was the look of pure contentment in his eyes when she read him bedtime stories, the same stories Miguel used to read to her over video calls from Afghanistan. Carmen had started a blog documenting their journey, which had grown into a support network for military families dealing with loss. Duke doesn't just carry Miguel's training, she wrote in her most popular post. He carries Miguel's love, his protection, his dedication to family, and his belief that loyalty is stronger than death. When I watch Lily and Duke together, I see my husband's values being passed on to the next generation in the most beautiful way possible. As the months passed, Lily's vocabulary expanded to include words like deployment, sacrifice, and honor, not as abstract concepts, but as lived realities that she understood through her connection with Duke. She would often tell other children about her daddy the soldier and Duke the hero dog, sharing their story with the natural confidence of a child who has never doubted that love conquers all obstacles. On the first anniversary of their reunion, the Pine Ridge Police Department held a special ceremony honoring Duke's service and his unique role in the community. Lily, now 5 years old and more articulate than ever, was invited to speak about her special friend. Duke isn't just my dog, she told the assembled crowd, her small voice carrying clearly through the microphone. He's my daddy's promise that came true. Daddy said he would always protect me, and he sent Duke to keep that promise. Duke teaches me to be brave like Daddy was, and to love people the way Daddy loved us. As applause filled the room, Duke sat at perfect attention beside Lily's podium, his chest puffed with pride and his tail wagging with the knowledge that his mission, the final mission Miguel had given him, was being accomplished with honor. The story that began with a frantic search in the Texas wilderness had become a testament to the power of love, loyalty, and the unbreakable bonds that connect all living beings across time, distance, and even death itself. Miguel Martinez had kept his promise, ensuring that his daughter would never walk alone, protected always by the guardian angel he had trained, loved, and sent home to watch over his most precious treasure. In Duke's eyes, Miguel's love lived on, and in Lily's heart, her father's legacy would continue forever.